Welcome. We are Neil,
Luke and Dave.
340-somethings reminiscing on the runners and riders of 90s guitar music.
We look at the bands who soundtracked our youth on both sides of the pond and interview some of our heroes from the bands that defined a generation.
You'll hear about the good, the bad and the ugly of 90s guitar music.
This podcast is Stupid and Contagious.
Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Stupid and Contagious emergency podcast. Now, you may have been expecting to see Dave slumped in the corner somewhere, Neil scratching his face, me clicking my pen annoyingly, but unfortunately it's just me this week for a mini kind of emergency episode. Basically, what's happened is Neil has got laryngitis. He's had it all week, so we've been putting off the recording, hoping he'll get better, putting it off, and he seems to be getting worse, basically. So he's not up to appearing on camera or speaking or basically functioning in any meaningful way. So we were just going to skip a week, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to do that. So it's kind of very, very last minute. So we put these out at kind of Thursday night, midnight, Friday morning at midnight. It's now Thursday already. And Neil's just not up to it, basically. So the boys agreed to let me do whatever I want, basically. So I thought I would do a kind of a mini episode, a Luke's Guide too. So I was kind of scanning through my record shelves, thinking about what I could talk about. And I thought it'd be good to talk about stuff that I don't normally get to talk about on the podcast. There's loads of 90s music in my collection that is not guitar based, loads of electronica and stuff like that. I didn't want to do it that broad because I thought, we're probably going to end up doing a wang on electronic music of the 90s or 90s dance music or something like that at some point in the future. So I narrowed it right down, and I'm going to give you a guide to digital hardcore recordings, which are a 90s label based out of Germany. If that's not your thing, if you're not into kind of extreme breakcore, then that's cool, and completely understand. We apologize for the interruption in service, and we'll see you next week. If that might be your thing, then stick around and I'll give you not a complete guide, just a quick overview of the label and the scene. I'll go through a few different albums, and I'll give my top 5 essential digital hardcore releases. Okay, so let's get into it. So digital hardcore recordings is it's the name of the record label, but it also basically came to describe the whole sound of the music, basically. So any band or artist or producer that was making similar kind of music, they ended up calling it digital hardcore as a way to describe the sound. But originally it was just the name of the label. So it started in Berlin in 1994 by 3 people: Alec Empire, a bloke called Joel Amaretto, I thought that was a drink, and another guy called Pete Lawton. So they were basically bringing together a lot of different artists and producers that were kind of just beginning to emerge on the fringes of the scene in Berlin at the time. And the thing that these artists had in common was basically they were a mix of extreme music, punk, hardcore, breakbeat, ultra fast techno, kind of verging on gabba at times. And they were most of them, I think, shared the same kind of ethos, this kind of anti-fascist, anti-Nazi ethos that they were kind of kicking against at the time in the early to mid 90s in Germany. Now, the story goes that Alec set up the label after his band, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, Atari Teenage Riot. Regular viewers will have seen me wearing my Atari Teenage Riot on occasion and shoehorning a mention of the band at every opportunity I can get. So Atari Teenage Riot was signed apparently to Phonogram Records, like a major label. So they took the money, the advance that the record label gave them, didn't actually deliver them any music whatsoever, and they used that advance to set up their own record label, Digital Hardcore Records. Started releasing 12 inches in 94, and I think if you really want to know like the kind of the pure digital hardcore sound, those kind of early 12 inches are really, really good, like really intense, really experimental, really creative and innovative sounds going on. Started releasing kind of full albums in 95 and building up a really interesting kind of discography of music. Again, still mostly kind of based in Berlin at this time. Started playing live, doing gigs and stuff around the city. Pretty soon, word got out, picked up by John Peel pretty early on, of course. And I was looking at the John Peel wiki, whatever they call it, Peel, and apparently he played Atari Teenage Riot as early as 1994. So he was on it straight away, and I think much later in the 90s, in 99, he invited them to do like a big concert and stuff. They also the label also came to the attention of the Beastie Boys, who picked them up for distribution in the US. So that helped them to get their records out around the world. And again, of course, it just cements just how important the Beastie Boys were at this point in the 90s. And again, just how fucking cool they were, right? And how switched on they were to what was going on. From that, they started playing in America, in the UK, in Japan, around the mid 90s. Again, building up a really interesting kind of collection of music and building up a bit of a good reputation. I'll talk about it in a moment maybe, but I saw Atari Teenage Riot in the late 90s. I'm going to say 99. So when they were pretty well established already by them. Basically, that's the story of the label. So from 1995 to 2000, basically, where they kind of stopped releasing stuff. They released some of the most kind of extreme, groundbreaking, and just basically exciting music ever recorded, I think. Again, it's not all great because it's because they were innovating and they were doing stuff that no one had ever done before and haven't really done since. I think a lot of it is it's kind of hit and miss, but that's part of it, and that's part of kind of the charm I like as well. So, again, like the 12 inches, that they're pretty much all spot on. The kind of the longer albums, there's ebbs and flows in between where not everything hits, but it doesn't have to. It's just the fact that they're trying new stuff and they're making new sounds that for me was really exciting at the time, and that is still exciting to listen to now. All right, so I'll move on and I'll talk a little bit about the main band is basically Atari Teenage Riot, and Alec Empire, you can see him behind me, is the main guy behind it. So I'll talk a little bit about them, and then I'll talk about some more of the albums you can see behind me if you're watching on YouTube. Just to give you an overview of the label. All right. So Atari Teenage Riot formed in 1992, and as early as that. At first, they consisted of three people. So Alec Empire, Hanin Elias, you can see here, and Carl Crack, or MC Carl Crack. There was another member called Nick Endo who joined a few years later, but that early incarnation was just the three of them. I first heard of them. I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I remember reading a review in like the university newspaper, and this was when I think like Firestarter was like really massive. And everyone thought that, like, the Prodigy were scaring kids and were, pretty out there and extreme. And the review said something like, they make the Prodigy sound like Bell and Sebastian, or something like that. I can't remember exactly. It was something like that. And I was like, whoa, I've got to hear that. So I went to Edgeworld Records in Brighton, and I bought this EP, the Sick to Death EP. And I remember at the time, the guy that worked there, Colin, I wasn't really like I wasn't cool enough to be like best mates with the record shop owner. But I went in there often enough that he kind of knew the kind of music that I liked, and I remember him commenting like, "Oh, that's a bit much for you, isn't it?" and he was right at the time. It was. I don't think I'd ever listened to kind of anything that extreme before, but I was totally hooked. I just never heard anything like it. It just sounded. Yeah, the only word I can think of is just it's extreme. I'd never heard anything that loud, that fast, that aggressive before, I think. And yeah, I was totally hooked. By the way, I was very pleased. Many years later, I was listening to an old punk compilation CD, and there's a song called "Sick of You" by old, I guess, 70s or early 80s, maybe, punk band called The Users. And it was exactly the same line that Atari Teenage Riot had ripped off for it, and I was very, very excited to discover that. Although I've never seen anyone else mention it, so maybe I'm the first one to discover. I'm sure I'm not, though. But yeah, check them out. Well, if they're on Spotify, which I doubt either of them are, I'll try to put them side by side on Spotify so you can hear. So yeah, the User song "Sick of You" and Atari Teenage Riot "Sick to Death." Yeah, as I was about to say earlier, I saw them at the Albert in Brighton in 1999. For people that know the Albert, it's a tiny room above the pub. Now it's famous for having a mural of John Peel on the outside, although I'm not sure if that's there anymore. Anyway, it's a shitty little room above a pub, and they were doing, I think it was a warm-up gig for a bigger show in London. And I've somehow managed to get tickets, and I dragged my sister and her husband along to go with me. And it was probably the most extreme and scary gig I've ever been to in my life. Basically, Alec Empire, super intense, throwing himself on the floor, smashing himself in the face with the microphone. And yeah, it was fucking amazing. Probably one of my top five ever gigs, I guess. Yeah, we met this American guy called John Thomas O'Neill. Never forgotten his name, and he had nowhere to stay. He was such like an Atari Teenage Riot obsessive. He just kind of like traveled. I think he was living somewhere in the UK, like Manchester or something, and he'd like traveled all the way down to go to this gig, and he didn't have anywhere to stay. And I remember I took him to the Pavilion Tavern. It was indie night. I took him there, and then he stayed at our house, which is strange, right? Probably wouldn't invite a stranger to stay over at our house these days, but hey, yeah, it was the 90s. It was a safe time. It was all good. You know, you got to help out a fellow fan. So John Thomas O'Neill, if you're watching or listening, hello. They also so they distributed by the Beastie Boys. They also did a split 7-inch with upcoming guests on the show, Asian Dub Foundation, and I think that was the first time that they released their Free Satpel Ram. That was their side of the split 7-inch picture disc, which was really cool. Yeah, they basically they split up in 2000. So just before that, Hannin Elias had left the band, but in 2000, very sadly, MC Carl Crack, he died. Well, it's difficult to know. It's not clear exactly how he died, but basically he'd been suffering with psychosis for many years, and apparently his kind of psychotic attacks were getting worse, and he was basically found with an overdose of prescription pills. So it's not clear whether it was kind of accidental through, as part of a kind of a psychosis triggered kind of attack, or whether it was deliberate suicide. So, I mean, some people say it was because apparently he was told by the doctor, not long before he died, that he's probably going to have to live with this condition for the rest of his life. So I guess a lot like Kurt Cobain, not wanting to live with his kind of stomach condition for the rest of his life. Maybe Carl didn't want to live with having kind of psychosis attacks forever, and decided to that was the best way out. But I guess we'll never know. But yeah, that's pretty sad, and the band kind of split up after that. They reformed in 2010, and they've been releasing stuff intermittently. I think they've got an album called what's it called? We're from the Internet, which is a great title, and play gigs and stuff now and again. Alec Empire, the main guy behind Atari Teenage Riot and the label itself, has done countless kind of solo albums over the years, going right back to the beginning of the band, and they're all really interesting. And he's done loads of production and collaborations and stuff like that. And if you see his name on anything, it's worth having a listen, basically. All right, so that is Atari Teenage Riot. I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the interesting records on there. Before I do, though, I'd just like to do a quick mention of the Amen break. So especially like the early stuff on Digital Hardcore makes extensive use of the Amen break. For people that are not familiar, it's like it's a sample of it's a drum break from a soul record from 1969 called Amen Brother by a band called the Winstons, and it's just like a 7-second kind of drum break that gets looped over, and it formed like the basis of a lot of early hip-hop tracks, a lot of drum and bass, a lot of electronica, and kind of the early digital hardcore stuff makes extensive use of it. And I guess there's probably books and stuff written about it, right? It's so integral to the history of kind of hip hop and electronic music in the 80s and 90s, and it's just one 7-second sample from an old 60s soul tune. It's pretty cool. Anyway, what was I going to talk about? All right. I'm going to talk about what do we got? This is an interesting one. Nintendo Teenage Robots. So Atari Teenage Riot, Nintendo Teenage Robots. This is, I think it's made entirely on like 8-bit. So like like a Game Boy or something like that. So I guess nowadays it would be called chiptune, but this was kind of a pioneer of that kind of sound. I really like it. It takes a bit of getting used to, but it's a cool sound. On the other side, we got this one. It is not actually on Digital Hardcore. It wasn't released on the label itself, but it's Alec Empire produced. It's Alec Empire, basically. It's called Hyper Modern Jazz 2000.5, and as the name suggests, it's kind of like this improvisational kind of laid back. It's got a little bit of jazzy elements in it, but it's still got some intense drum programming, some extreme breakbeats and stuff like that. What else can I talk about? This is good. Curse of the Golden Vampires. This is Alec Empire and Techno Animal, and it's pretty full on, pretty extreme, really cool. This is not digital. Well, it should have been Digital Hardcore. So this is Alec Empire versus Elvis Presley. It's a kind of funny record, really. So it's just basically Alec Empire apparently he got obsessed with watching Elvis films one summer or whatever, I guess, and so it's got loads of samples from Elvis movies, basically, with Alec putting kind of drum breaks and breakcore behind it, and it's a really cool kind of quirky little album. And apparently it was supposed to come out on Digital Hardcore, but they got threatened with legal action by the Presley estate. And so I guess he put it out on a different label, because it did come out on a different label who weren't scared by the might of the Presley estate. But I guess Alec backed down from putting it out on his own label. That's a good one. Live at the Brixton Academy is it's probably the most extreme kind of live recording I've ever heard. It's almost unlistenable in parts. It's just extreme speed and aggression and noise, just full on noise the whole way through. And at first you kind of like, this is just rubbish. And then you kind of draws you in and sucks you in. You become attuned to it. And then it just ends up sounding like the best fucking thing ever. Well, to my ears, at least. All right, that's some interesting things on the label. All right, so I've been talking for ages and people are probably completely bored and switched off by now. So I'm going to finish off by giving you my top 5 essential digital hardcore releases. Number 5 is Cobra Killer, self-titled album. I think it's their first album. So Cobra Killer is two women, Gina D'Orio and Annika Trost, and actually they play in different digital hardcore bands as well. So Gina plays in Equator, I'm going to talk about in a moment, and Annika plays in Shizuo. You can see there, this album Shizuo versus Shizuo. And yeah, it's kind of a little bit different from a lot of the digital hardcore stuff. It's still got the break beats and the noise, but it's got a bit more kind of melody, and it's got kind of a 60s kind of vibe to some aspects of it. And I really like it. I love it. So yeah, Cobra Killer, self-titled first album. That's my number 5 pick from digital hardcore. Number 4 is the aforementioned Equator. So there's Gina there, and yeah, this came out in 97. This is called All of Us Can Be Rich, and it's just a full on kind of noise assault of breakcore electronic noise, basically. But yeah, really, really good. Cocaine Ducks opening track is really good. The title track, All of Us Can Be Rich, is really good. I like this title. One track minded fuckheads. I mean, can't go wrong with that, really. So that's my number 4 pick. Equate or All of Us Can Be Rich. Number 3 is this album. I think it's kind of a compilation, maybe. So it's just Atari Teenage Riot called 1995. And basically, it's just got the best of all the early stuff on there. So a lot of the tracks that kind of help them kind of make a name for himself at the time. So yeah, Start the Riot, Into the Death, MIDI Junkies, I'm gonna fuck you up, Delete Yourself. These are kind of, basically a lot of them I think were released on 12 inches, and to me they are kind of this is what Atari Teenage Riot is, basically. Those kind of really aggressive kind of punk, basically, punk but with breakcore. And it's also got a cover of Sham 69, Kids Are United, on it, which is fucking amazing. So yeah, that's my number 3 pick, Atari Teenage Riot. So if you want to start anywhere, basically start with this album. This is the sound of digital hardcore, basically. My number 2 pick is a 12-inch by Bomb 20, and it's called Flip Burgers or Die is the name of the EP, which is a great name. And yeah, it's difficult to know why. I just love this 12-inch so much. So the opening track, Made of Shit, and it's got like lots of like movie samples and stuff like that. And yeah, it's just a really, really cool kind of extreme breakbeat. And I remember one night, I don't know if it's the first track or the second track on it. One night I was watching something like Channel 4 or something like that, and it was like a film, and the film started as the film Rasputin. I don't know if anyone's seen it. I remember nothing about the film whatsoever, but I was watching it kind of half drunk, I think half asleep, and the sample that they use in here comes up. The sample's like the blood my family spilled marked the start of the bloodiest century that the world has ever known, or something like that. And it's the exact same sample, and I just jumped off the sofa. I was super excited to hear and find it in real life. Also, I saw Bomb 20 at the Freebut in Brighton, if you can imagine that. It must have been around 2000 or 2001. So it was a tiny space, the Freebut in Brighton, and it was one of the loudest things I've ever heard. And yeah, I don't know. It's maybe it's a personal thing, but my number 2 essential digital hardcore releases, Bomb 20, Flip Burgers or Die. All right, and my number 1 is an album I've probably talked about 2 or 3 times on the podcast. It's probably in my top 5 albums ever, and it's Christoph the Babylon. If you're into it, I'm out of it. So this came out in 97, and as the title suggests, he he's not only out of the mainstream, he's also kind of out of the loop when it comes to digital hardcore as well. So it's got so much darker, kind of downbeat, kind of depressing, kind of introspective kind of take on breakcore. There's lots of kind of long periods of kind of slower sounds and quieter times on the album, but it's still got that kind of skittering breakbeat. It's still got the aiming break in there and that kind of skittering, juddering kind of breakbeat that doesn't quite sit still and leaves you kind of anxious and jittery. And I think it's a work of genius. And I think I mentioned before, the only other person I've ever heard mention Christoph de Babylon is what's his name? The fella from Radiohead, Tom York. I can't remember the quote, but he called it something like the most depressing album he's ever heard, or something like that. I don't know about that. To me, I find it kind of uplifting. And people that talk about like when Radiohead went electronic and like Kid A and everything like that, and they talk about Warp and Aphex Twin and stuff. This is the guy they're ripping off, Christoph de Babylon. And this record, if you're into it, I'm out of it. And eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed, check out the dude's jumper. I'm wearing my Christoph de Babylon sweatshirt. How nerdy is that? If you don't know, you wouldn't know, right? It just says City Bound on it. But if you're in the know and you see me walking down the street, what would you think? Well, you'd think I'm a complete fucking twat for being such a nerd to buy the most obscure merchandise going. But there you go. He's my guy, Christoph de Babylon. If you're into it, I'm out of it. My top pick for digital hardcore. If you're a bit scared of the kind of the more aggressive stuff, start with this one, and it will ease you into the digital hardcore sound. And it's one of the best albums ever made. All right, I think I better stop there because I've been going on for ages and ages. So if you stuck with me thus far, I really appreciate it, and I really do apologize for this kind of emergency, strange kind of random mini episode. I promise you we'll be back next week, the full board, Neil, Dave and me, and we'll bring you excellent interview. So I really do apologize. Thanks for staying with us, and see you in a minute.